All right, so now we are ready to go to the next step in this skill. We now know how to take English arguments, translate them into SL. Now we need to learn how to use SL to solve the truth values of sentences. Now, this is a skill that is really working up to testing for validity, but it is a nice little skill anyway. Because we often have English language sentences that we can't keep track if they're true or false. I mean, let's listen to my wife and I trying to plan out how we're going to grocery shop when we run out of food during the coronavirus. Here's our basic plan. Okay, we'll go to Smith's if we can go early in the morning and if there aren't a lot of people there so we can avoid basic contact. But if Smith doesn't work, then we can try Natural Grocers. That place probably isn't as crowded because it's so overpriced. And if that doesn't work, we can always try somewhere like a Walmart or even a dollar store if we go at a really odd hours. But again, we can't do that unless, now listen to that whole sentence. There's a whole bunch of conditions of what we're going to do and what makes a sentence true or false. So let's isolate this skill. So we are going to look at how we can put SL into a simple table and determine the truth value of sentences. Now, I am going to do something really weird, like I'm a gamer for this. There is no easy way to teach this without being in a classroom and showing you how I do the work on a whiteboard. So instead, I am going to bring in my screen and watch and show you how to do these truth tables directly. Yes, I am like a gamer, right? This is awful. I have to stare at my own face some more. So, look at the screen here. Let me first get you ready for understanding the tables by going through a little preliminary step. If we have a sentence that is simply the sentence A, right? So look at my screen here, right? Hopefully this is capturing okay and clearly. If I have the sentence A, it is pretty easy that that sentence can either be true or false. So let's say A says, I like apples. Well, in the world, A could be true or A could be false, sorry. And so I would simply look at that and say, okay, those are the two truth conditions for the sentence A. Now, let's increase the complexity a little bit just to show you how the truth values change. Now notice. All right, let's see what happens when I have more sentences. So let's say you have a complex English sentence that has two SL sentences in it, or here's what we're really doing, right, is now we have an argument that has two sentences. Think of simple arguments like the Britney Spears argument, like the Doug is drunk again argument. We have an argument that has two sentences. Well, let's see what the different truth combinations will be when you have multiple situations that could occur. So now notice, and this is intuitive, if you have two sentences, I like apples, I like bananas, right, we need to look at what happens in the different combinations that could occur. So there is the first situation in which, obviously, both sentences are true. Now look what happens when we fill this in. We have a second situation, easy to think about, where the first sentence is true and the second sentence is false, or just the opposite, right? And finally, of course, we have the situation where both sentences are false. Good? So all we're doing is filling out a table, and this is how I would fill out the basic values of the sentences. But let me show you a little trick for when this thing gets more complicated. Let's say we have three sentences that we need to consider their truth values, and so what happens? There's an exponential growth in possibilities. I wrote numbers over here so you can keep track of, and so I can refer to the different lines. If we have three different sentences, well, notice, each sentence could be true or false, but that means the combinations of true and falses increases exponentially. Here is a handy little algorithm for filling in all the different combinations. Because when you only had four different sentences, it was easy to keep track of. One's true, the other's true, true, false. But when you have three sentences or more, let me show you a corny little algorithm that I use to fill in all the different truth combinations consistently. Here's what we do. We start with the last letter alphabetically. Now notice, I put my sentences in order. In an argument, they might be in any sort of order, so you would just find the sentence letter you assigned and work backwards up the alphabet. So C, right? The sentence C. What do? Alphabetically, I start with C, and here I simply alternate true, false all the way down the table. There are half truths, half falses, and so I simply alternate true, false all the way down. As I work up the alphabet, I simply double how I alternate. So B's will be 2 true, 2 false, 2 true, 2 false, all the way down the table. When I come to A, I simply double how I alternate. C every 1 line, B every 2 lines, A every 4 lines. So I simply double how I alternate as I work up the alphabet. Now I have every combination of truth values for 3 sentences at the same time. Notice, because of this little algorithm, even if arguments have multiple sentences that we need to consider, we can still use the same algorithm to fill that in. So, of course, this would be more complex and in various orders in an actual argument. But when I'm filling in the values of the sentences, notice, I can still follow the same sequence. The last letter of the alphabet simply alternates true, false every row as I work my way down. As I work up the alphabet, I simply alternate true every 2 lines. So 2 true, 2 false, all the way down. As I continue working up the alphabet, what do? I simply double how I alternate. So this one is now 4 truths, 4 falses, all the way down my table. Keep going, same sequence. What do I do now? I double how I alternate from the last letter. I work up the alphabet, and now I alternate every 8 lines. I know this looks like a mess, but I think you can see the sequencing. What have I done? I have filled in every value, and I've included every possible combination of values by simply filling in using that sequence, that algorithm method I just showed you. So that's going to be a trick we're going to rely on. And so now we can start looking at what happens to these truth values of sentences when you combine them with different connectives. So let's do that. All right, so now we want to see what happens to English sentences that we've translated into SL, what happens to their truth values when we combine them with different connectives. So here's a basic sentence, here is this one. Again, we'll just say sentence A stands for I like apples. Now, as we saw just a second ago, there are 2 different truth possibilities. Now notice, this is a single sentence, and negation is a one-place connective. That means it only affects the sentence to its right. Now, please keep in mind, if this was an incredibly complex sentence, the negation can still only do one thing. What does a negation do in English and also in SL? It simply reverses the value of the sentence. So, situation 1, I like apples. Let's say that's true in this world, in this situation. What happens if we instead say negative A? Well, if A is true, negative A is false. Now notice, I am bolding this because that is the main connective of this sentence. That is the final value. If the sentence A is false, what happens to the negation? It would make the sentence true. Now, not too many people are good at memorizing a visual table. So what we are going to do, and this I'm going to try to be incredibly annoying, right? But please do this. I know it sounds crazy. Is I need you to memorize this by simply repeating it a lot in your head. You will get used to it. You don't have to look at flashcards. I will say it repeatedly, and this one is really easy. In order to make this easy to remember, we're going to simply remember this basic sentence. And negation reverses the truth value of the sentence or the statement. Again, repeat. Please act like a psycho or just tell people you're on some vid chat, right? Talking to someone cool. Just don't let them see that it's your balding philosophy professor, right? But pretend this is some new cool hip hop song. What does a negation do, kids? It reverses the truth value of the statement. Easy to remember. Good? So now let's look at the next one. Here is an and sentence, right? Let's say this sentence says, I like apples and I like bananas. Now, what did we see before? We need to look at all the different truth combinations that could occur so we can see what happens to and in all 4 situations. An and is a two-place connective, so we'll be comparing the truth values of two sentences. What do I do first? I fill in the values like I showed you in our little algorithm. In the last letter alphabetically, it'll alternate true, false, true, false. A will alternate true, true, false, false. That's easy to see. We have simply captured all four truth combinations. True, 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 false, false, true, false, false. So we can see what happens to the and. So let's think about it. If I say a simple and sentence like, I like apples and I like bananas, think about in English what would make that true. Well, I've only told the truth if I do in fact like apples and bananas. So let's look at it in a table. In situation 1, the situation is I like apples and I like bananas. If I do in fact like apples and bananas, then I told the truth, my sentence is true. That's what and does. If I say I like apples and bananas, but in fact I don't like bananas, then my sentence is false. In situation 2, it's false. If I say I like apples and I like bananas, but I actually don't like apples, then my sentence is false. If I say I like apples and bananas and I actually don't like either of them, then the sentence is false. We will bold that line. We will circle this. If you're doing this handwritten, we will circle the main connective value when we solve it. This is our whole sentence, so this is the main connective. So we would circle, I will bold the final value under the main connective. So what do we find here? An and is actually very easy to remember, right? Please follow along and repeat. What do we find? An and is only true when both sides are true. So to make it easy to remember, what we'll be doing is simply finding the exception. So an and is false except when both sides are true. An and is only true in the case where both sides are true, in this case, situation 1. So let's continue. Now I have this sentence, and this time I've already filled in the values. You can see all four possible truth combinations. Good. And now I have an or. An or is almost as intuitive as the and. It has one issue, so we'll skip line 1 just because that could be the one that's not absolutely intuitive. So let's try this. I say, go back to my corny sentences, I either like apples or I like bananas. Now, let's start in situation 2 right here. In situation 2, right, let me put my cursor next to it so you're looking. Let's say I like apples, but I don't like bananas. Well, if I said I like apples or I like bananas, then that, of course, is true. If I say I like apples or I like bananas, I don't like apples, but I do like bananas, we would say that's still true. That's how an or works. If I say I like apples or I like bananas and I don't like either of them, then I lied. The sentence is false. Here's the only one that might be a little less intuitive. We are going to treat the or as inclusive, meaning if I say I like apples or bananas and I like both, we'll still say I didn't lie because I liked at least one of them. Now, in this sentence, that is the main connective. Oops, sorry. In this sentence, that is the main connective, so I will bold it. Good. In writing, we would circle it because that is the main connective of this sentence. What does this mean? Or is easy to remember. An or is only false when both sides are false. So notice, an or is true in every case except when both sides of the or are false. Clear. Now let's go to the next one. Now to make this condition meaningful, I changed the sentences slightly. I already filled in the combinations like we do, right? These are all four possibilities. But let's have a more meaningful causal connective sentence. So let's try this. You guys, let's say, aren't sure if I'm human. So you created a theory that you're going to test because you guys are terrible. Your theory is that if someone is a human, then if you choke them, they will die. If we choke a human, right, and keep choking them, of course, then they will die. So your theory is we think Jeff's a human. We're pretty sure he's not a cyborg or a robot or some demon. So if he's a human, if we choke him, he will die. Now notice, so what does this mean? According to your theory, if I'm a human, if you choke me, I will die. You choke me, you terrible people, and I die. What does that mean? Your theory is correct. Good. Now, situation 2. What happens if you choke me and I don't die? Well, then I'm not a human. Your theory is correct. If you choke me and I don't die, then your theory is false and I'm not human. Because if I'm a human, if you choke me, I die. You choke me, I don't die. Suckers, I live on forever. Good? Your theory is false in this sense. You choked me, I didn't die. Good? Now, these last two are a little less intuitive, but think about them. Your theory is, if Jeff's human, if we choke him, he will die. Well, if you don't choke me, that doesn't mean I'll never die, right? I'm still human, right? I just wasn't choked. I died of old age. I drowned, right? Whatever. Good? Your theory is still correct. This would still follow if you're a human. If you don't choke a human, they will still eventually die. That doesn't disprove your theory. Your theory that I'm human is still probably true. Next one, my favorite. In situation 4, your theory is if you choke me, then I will die, right? You don't choke me, and I don't die. That's the situation we have today, suckers, right? You can't choke me, I'm not dead, right? So what happens? Your theory is still correct. You didn't say what happened if you don't choke me, right? This is the situation today. It only follows if you choke me, right? It's only false if you choke me and I don't die. So, what is the easy situation? What is the easy phrase to remember? This one. An arrow is only false when ordered true then false. Notice this. A conditional is the only connective in which the order matters, right? We remember this in translating, but it's also true of its truth conditions. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. Notice, if it's all ordered false then true, that doesn't make it false. It is still true in that case. A conditional is only false in a situation where it is true on the left, false on the right. Again, repeat after me. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. Let's change the cadence so you sound even more weird. Let's use row, row, row your boat cadence. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. Don't show that to anyone. All right. Let's look at our fifth connective, the biconditional. Now for this case, again, I wanted to have an English sentence that actually made some sense, so I created two new sentences. Here it is, L. L stands for you are a legal driver. Good? V stands for you have a valid driver's license. So now we can make a meaningful biconnective sentence. Look at this one makes sense. The sentence is, you are a legal driver if and only if you have a valid driver's license. That's the law. So let's apply this basic biconditional law to the 4 cases we could face, right? So the law says, you are a legal driver if and only if you have a valid driver's license. Well, I'm a legal driver and I have a valid driver's license. That is correct. That is how the law works. Situation 2. You are a legal driver, but you don't have a valid driver's license. Well, sorry, you have broken the law. You are not fitting the biconditional rule. You are a legal driver if and only if you have a valid driver's license. Well, let's say you are not a legal driver, but you have a valid driver's license. You're using this to get drunk or something. You cheaters, you have your fake IDs. What does this mean? Again, you did not follow the biconditional, you broke the law. Last situation. You are a legal driver if and only if you have a valid driver's license. Well, you're not a legal driver and you don't have a valid driver's license. Well, so then the law is accurate. The sentence follows, it is true. So what does this mean? Oh, of course, right? I forgot. We would circle this sentence because it is the final values, right? Sorry for forgetting that. And so what does this mean? To make the biconditional easy to remember, we'll use this phrase. Oops. A biconditional is only true when both sides have the same value. To make that easier, say it this way. A biconditional is true when both sides are the same. Look at sentences 1 and sentence 4 have the same value, and that makes a biconditional true. So again, a biconditional is true when both sides are the same. It's false in the cases where they're not the same. Did you repeat after me? You better, right? This is so embarrassing. A biconditional is true when both sides are the same. Row, row, row your boat. A biconditional is only true when both sides are the same. Damn it. A biconditional is true when both sides are the same. We need to get that in our heads so that when we're filling in very complicated sentences, we don't have to look at our tables. We can just remember the conditions in our head. I will keep repeating them until I drive you crazy. All right, as I promised, we're going to have to keep reviewing these until we really have them down. So here's our first table for the negation. Again, please repeat after me. I swear, your brain works better when it acts in multiple formats, right? Don't just stare at something, act on it, say it, hear it, right? So this will get into your head if you go through this annoyance. Negation. A negation reverses the truth value of the sentence. And. An and is only true when both sides are true. Repeat. An and is only true when both sides are true. Or. An or is only false when both sides are false. An or is only false when both sides are false. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. A biconditional is only true when both sides are the same. A conditional is true when both sides are the same. All right, so now we're ready. So what we are doing now is we are going to take those truth conditions, apply them to SL sentences so that we can solve the values of sentences, so that we can then use this to test validity of arguments. So we're building up from sentences, and then we'll look at arguments and validity. Now notice here, so what I've done is taken in very short form and written our rules for how the truth, So what I've done here is simply at the top of our page, I've written the 5 rules that we're memorizing. These are the effects, these are how you solve the truth conditions for each connective. There they are in a nice short and clear way. One more time. A negation reverses the truth value of the sentence. Repeat. A negation reverses the truth value of a sentence. Next, and. An and is only true when both sides are true. Repeat. An and is only true when both sides are true. An or. An or is only false when, An or is only false. So, repeat. We do have to do this. A negation reverses the truth value of the sentence. Repeat after me. A negation reverses the truth value of the sentence. And. An and is only true when both sides are true. Or. An or is only false when both sides are false. Conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. A biconditional. A biconditional is only true when both sides are the same. Ready? Okay, let's try. So I will start and you finish, right? I'm going to go in random order, right? You can look at the screen, right? But try to get it into your head. Multiple techniques. Let's start random. A conditional. A conditional is only true. So let's go in any sort of order. A conditional, right? Can you finish? A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. And. An and is only true when both sides are true. Biconditional. A biconditional is true when both sides are the same. Or. An or is only false when both sides are false. And. An and is only true when both sides are true. Conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. Negation, easy, reverses the truth value of the sentence. Okay, so here is the only rule we need for solving the truth values of sentences, right? So watch, this is really simple once you learn the mechanics. What is the rule? Here is the technique. Solve from smallest to largest scope until you solve the main connective. So notice, we have to be familiar with scope. So we need to see how much of the sentence is affected by the connective, and that's how we'll solve. We'll solve from smallest scope to largest scope. All right. So let's look at a first example, right? So let's bring this up. So for all our examples and for the S exercises, we are going to use these as the values of our basic sentence letters. So for our examples we'll talk about, and for the S exercises that we'll go over in a little bit, these are the values we're going to use. These are just me throwing out random values. There's no deeper meaning to this. We're just going to say, for practice, A is true, the sentence B is false, the sentence C is true. All right, so let's look at our first example. Let me bring this up. Good. So our first example is the sentence B and C. Now, I'll try to mimic what this will look like on paper, right? So, sentence B and C, what I typically would do is underline the sentence. Now, our technique is working from smallest to largest scope until we've solved the main connective. So, please follow me along on paper, write down B and C and underline it. So, the smallest scope for any sentence is always the basic sentence letters, so we'll start there. Our sentence, according to our dictionary B, is false. Is false. Our sentence C is, according to our dictionary, true. Now notice, we are comparing the value of B, let me use my cursor, we are comparing the sentence value B, false, to the sentence value for C, which is true, and we're comparing it in terms of and. Good? So we look at the truth conditions for and it says an and is only true when both sides are true. Well, are both sides true in this case? No, both sides are not true, so this and is false. Now notice, this and is the main connective of our sentence. So that means what? That means that this value, once we've solved the main connective, is the final truth value. If you are working on paper, when you reach the main connective, please circle the final value and only the final value. So what do we have? Our sentence is complete. This sentence in this world that I've made up is false in this case. Do you see it? An and is only true when both sides are true, so this and, because both sides are not true, is false. This and sentence is false. All right. Let's bring up another sentence. Now, I will be getting these sentences out of the way, so please know that you can always go back, you can always pause, but I'm going to try to make this really clear, so I'm going to remove the sentences we've already worked on. So we have this sentence. Let's look at it. The sentence says A or C, and so we need to always identify our main connective. So let me put that in bold, right? So it stands out. Now, I am, to make this really clear to work, and so I'm not moving my cursor around so much to the point of being annoying, I am going to create a little table. So I took my sentence, I put it in this little table, right? I clearly label my main connective. If I was you, I would draw a little star over this, right? Maybe underline it, maybe draw it in real bold, right? On a test, it'll exist already. So yes, I would put a little asterisk or star over it. So I remember that that is the value I will solve last. That is the value of the sentence. So what do? We look above, solve from smallest to largest scope until you solve the main connective. The smallest scope is always the basic sentence letters, so I fill in those values. What does it tell me? In the dictionary, it tells me that A is true and C is true. So what do we have? We are now comparing these two sentences in terms of the or disjunction. What is our rule? An or is only false when both sides are false. This is a case where both sides are clearly not false, so this or is true. That is the final value, so I would circle it. I have solved the value of that sentence. Okay, let's look at the next one. Our next sentence is here, and this time I will leave the sentence up above so we can look at it, and then I'll also put it in my table. So here it is. We always start by labeling our main connective, right? So we make our main connective really stand out. Maybe you can underline it, right? Maybe you can do whatever you do. Good, there it is. Let's also label it in our table. What do? Our steps. We work from smallest to largest scope. Smallest scope will always be the basic sentence letters. C is true. A is also true. So now we are solving in terms of this conditional. Our conditional says A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. Is this one ordered true then false? No, it's not. So this one is true. That is my main connective. So if I was writing, I would circle it. That is the value under the main connective. I have solved the sentence. The sentence is true. All right, so let's continue to the next one. The next sentence, here it is, right? I put it up above and in the table. Here, we're getting a little more complex, and so now we have to pay attention to scope. But the smallest scope will always be the basic sentence letters. So what do we have in this case? According to our dictionary right up above, A is true, C is true. Now we have more complication, so we have to worry about smallest to largest scope. The smallest scope will be this negation. Do you see it? Its scope only affects A. If it was outside parentheses, then it would affect the sentence, but it's inside. There are no parentheses. It's just connected to A. So what effect does a negation have? A negation simply reverses the value of the sentence to its right. A is true, so not A is false. Now, notice, I need to realize that this value, false here, has replaced the value of the A here. In this video, I will highlight it. This is fairly corny, right? But notice, I need to completely neglect this value. We are not concerned with the value of A anymore. We're concerned with the value of not A. So I'm looking at the column under the negation. Now what am I doing? I'm comparing the value of not A to the value of C. Let me make that stand out too. So I am only paying attention to these two column values. And now I can solve, what's this? This is our main connective, right? I will make it stand out. And so I'm comparing this value to this value in terms of this biconditional. Biconditional says what? A biconditional is true when both sides are the same. We're comparing our values. Negative A's value is false. The right side C's value is true. Biconditional, both sides are not the same, so the biconditional is false. That's our final value. So I circle it. I will put it in bold. That is the final value of our sentence. Circle that. Our sentence is false. Try more complication. Our next sentence is this, right? So here it is written above. Here it is written in the table. Now I need to pay attention carefully. I'll begin by labeling my main connective. Where is it? Notice, all of these are inside parentheses. This is outside parentheses. So there is my main connective. That is the value I will solve last. Good, because it's outside the parentheses. Now I work. Here is my main connective. I'll make it stand out. Good. I work from smallest to largest scope. Smallest scope is always the sentence letters, so I solve those first. A is true, B is false. Good. Now I need to look carefully. What is the next largest scope as I'm working my way up? What is it? Look at the sentence here. B has a small scope, and this negation only applies to B, so I solve it next. If B is false, not B is true. I will do my little trick. I will highlight this column so you can see it. And what do we have? This is now the value that has replaced this value. If you want to, you can even cross out this value. Make sure you can still see it under the line, but you can cross this out. Good? So now look at what I'm comparing. I'm comparing the value under this negation to the value under this A, to the value under this A in terms of this and. So look at this. An and's value is determined by this rule. An and is only true when both sides are true. What do we have? Both sides are true, so this and is true. Good? So this and's value now replaces all these other values. So I am not concerned anymore with these other values. I am only concerned with the value under and. Good? Let's see. Can we be really annoying? And let's make that orange, right? So it really stands out. So now the only value I have left is this and value, which is true. And now I can solve for my main connective. If this whole sentence, and it is true, then to reverse it, the final value is, false. I would circle that value. It is the value under my main connective, and so that is my final value. This whole sentence is false. I reverse the value of the sentence in parentheses that was represented by this and true. Good. Next. We're getting more and more complex. Our next sentence is this. Good. We need to make the main connective stand out. So we're sure, look, okay, all of this is in parentheses. This is in parentheses. So this is our main connective. I will bold it. In our sentence down here, this is our main connective. That is our final value. That value will determine the value of the whole sentence. Okay? Now let me use a slightly different technique. Let me show you how I do this, because I don't highlight on a piece of paper. That would take too much time. So what I use is underlining. Good? So let me say what I would do, see if you can follow me. I work from smallest to largest scope. Again, what's smallest? Always the basic sentence letters by themselves. Now, let me say a little tangent. Some of you like to skip the step of filling in this value. So you might want to say this. You might say, okay, A is true, but I know it's negated, so I'll just fill in that value. That is nice and it is smart, but you will want to have these original values. When we do something very advanced at the very end of the semester, you don't want to skip this step because it could screw you up. So I know that's a nice shortcut, but you can't do it. It'll lead to problems later. So what do? We first fill in the values of the basic sentence letters. According to our dictionary, B is false, A is true, C is true, B is false. Simply still filled in those values. Now, I'm looking for the next largest scope. I'm going from smallest to largest scope. What do I see? I can fill in this negation right away because it only affects A. These other values affect larger scopes. The A is only simply negated here. So what does that mean? If A is true, negative A is false. Now, what I will do this time, as I said, is I'm going to do the tricks I use. I underline the values that are the most important. I could even, if I want, and let me do this, cross out this value so I don't even pay attention to it anymore. Now, if you're really doing this, you would just strike through so you can still see it. I'm going to remove it so it doesn't get in our visual way. What does this mean? Now, the value of not A is false, and I'm comparing it to the value of B in terms of this and. Here's what I would do if this was me working. I would underline the values I'm comparing. So, now I can clearly see what's being compared, these two underlined values, and they're being compared in terms of and. What do we know about and? The rule? An and is only true when both sides are true. Both sides are not true, right? So this and is, This and is not true, so this and is false. An and is only true when both sides are true. This is not true, so this one's false. Now what I would do in the real world is I would underline that value twice. Good. There's not an easy way to do that here. And what can I do if I'm really worried about this? I can even get rid of, or on paper, cross out or draw a line through those values. So I realize that this value replaced all these other values. The value of the sentence inside this left parentheses is false. I go to the right side now. I now have two values, right? C true, B false, and I'm comparing in terms of a biconditional. A biconditional is only true when both sides are the same. Both sides are not the same, so this biconditional is false. I would underline that value. That's the only value I'm considering. Now notice. In this case, right, I could cross through these values, but I won't. I think it's very clear if you just look at the two underlined values. In this case, this would be underlined twice, so I would underline this one twice so I can see what I'm comparing. And notice, if you use the underlining and if you want the strike-through technique, this makes it really easy for me to see the order in which you've worked. Good? So what do I have left? I have the value of this sentence in parentheses on the right, false. The value of this parentheses on the left, false, and I'm comparing in terms of or. An or is only false when both sides are, sorry, yes, that's true. An or is only false when both sides are false. So this or is false because both sides are false. That is my final value. I would circle it if it was on paper. That's the value of my whole sentence. This sentence, complex sentence, is false in this case. Good. So continue. More complicated. This one's a huge pain. Look at it. Now, what you have to do in cases like this is I would literally use my fingers and point to my parentheses so I can see where each parentheses opens and closes, right? So there's that parentheses inside that one, and that's then negated. This parentheses open and closes. So notice, right? My main connective is either this arrow or this negation. I need to double check. Yes, this negation stops there. It applies here, where this conditional, what is its scope? Everything. It connects this sentence to this sentence. So this is my main connective. I, on paper, would draw a star over it, right? I would write it in dark, make sure that I know that that's my final value I will solve last. So I work this down to the table. This is the value I am concerned with. That is my main connective's value. It doesn't really show up on computer when I bold it, so sorry. That's about as dark as it gets. Good? So I am working as I normally do from smallest to largest scope. I begin by filling in the sentence values I was provided for in the dictionary. A is true, B is false, C is true, B is false, C is true. Those are the values I have from my dictionary up above. I simply filled those in. It is not voodoo. I was given those values. Now, I need to be careful. I need to work from smallest to largest scope. So let's start over here on the left. If there are multiple parentheses, I start within the innermost parentheses. If one of these values was negated, I would start there, but they're not negated. So let's start right here with this or sentence. Here it is in my table. We look at the conditions for the value of an or, a disjunction. A disjunction is only false when both sides are false. So this or is true. Good? This value here has replaced the other values around it, so I can underline it. I can even cross out the other values. Let me do this one with just underlining. Now where do I work? I am working from, notice, this parentheses to now moving out to the larger parentheses to solve this value, comparing it to C. So let me underline that value so you can see what I'm comparing. I am comparing the value under this or to the value under this C in terms of this or here. Good? So what are the truth conditions for that conditional, the or? So what are the truth conditions for an or sentence? An or is only false when both sides are false. This does not have both sides false, so this this or is true. If I was working and I had a pencil, I would double underline this value, right? Now I can't do that in this case. I will double underline the value if I was working on paper. So what will I do? I will simply remove these underlines, right? So that you can see that that double underline value would clearly stand out to you. So now notice this value replaced all of these values. This or is true, but notice this whole sentence here is negated. So what happens to this value true? It becomes false. That value now replaces all of these values. I would triple underline this if I was working on paper. I will simply remove that underline so you will see what happened. All of these values are replaced now by the value under the negation. This or is true, so the negation is false. Now I have to work on the right side. Smallest scope, sentence letters filled in. Now notice this negation. This negation only connects to B, so I have to solve it before I do anything else. If B is false, negative B is true. If I'm working in writing, would underline that value. That replaces this value of B. Negative B is more important, and it's true. Now I will be comparing negative B to the value under C here in terms of and. And is only true when both sides are true. Look at it. Both sides are in fact true. So this and is true. I will underline that value. If this was paper, that would be double underlined. So I will take these underlines off so the underlining stands out. So what you would have is this would be triple underlined. And so I would triple underline this if I was working on paper. What do I have? All I have left is my main connective value. My main connective is a conditional. We know a conditional is only false when it's ordered true then false. Is this one ordered true on the left, false on the right? No. So this is not a false case. So this main connective is true. That is the main connective. I circle it. That is the final value of this sentence. This sentence in this situation is true. So now we will turn and look at the S exercises on page 20. So I have simply taken them and written them out the way we have so far. All right, so the S exercises on page 20, let's look at those, right? Here we are. Here is what it says for number 1. I've simply written it into the table. We look at our sentence and what do we find? I'll just work in the table this time. Here, obviously, is our main connective. I would draw a star over it if I was you. I'm going to underline it because that's the best I can do on the screen. We solve from smallest to largest scope. This is probably becoming easier for you now. According to our dictionary, A is true, B is false. We are solving this in terms of a conditional. What are the rules for a conditional? A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. So this case is false. That is my main connective. I would circle it. I'll bold it for this case. Easy. Let's go to the next case. S exercises number 2. Little more complex, right? I will work down here. I first have to make sure my main connective is clear. So here is my main connective. Look, all of this is in parentheses. This is the main connective of the sentence. I will bold that in. That's the final value I'm working for. We know how this goes. We work from smallest to largest scope, which is always, the smallest is always the basic sentence letters. A is true, B is false, C is true, according to our dictionary. Now, what order do I work in? I go from smallest scope. If I have parentheses, I always start inside them. And notice this negation only applies to B, so that is a very small scope, so I will solve the value of negative B before I do anything else. If B is false, not B is true. This case, again, I'm going to keep looking at different techniques, see what you like. I am going to pretend that I crossed out this value because I don't care about it. Now I'm looking at negative B, not B. So now I stay inside the parentheses and solve this OR. An OR is only false when both sides are false, so this OR is obviously true. This case again, I'm going to pretend I'm using the cross-out method. I will cross out the values I've replaced. This OR represents the value of the whole parentheses here. So now notice, if I'm crossing out, these are the only values I have left. I am ready to solve the main connective because I have all the other connectives solved. Now I am solving AND. An AND, what do we know? An AND is only true when both sides are true. So this AND is true. That is the final value, so I would circle it. That has replaced all other values. I would still be able to see them in writing. I would simply draw a line through them. That's my final value. Now you see, of course, I prefer underlining if you can do it because then I can see your work, right? Crossing out still makes it pretty chaotic. So when I'm looking at it, I can't see what you solved first, second, and third. Final value, solved. All right. So let's look at sentence 3 in the S exercises on page 20. Here we are. I begin by filling in, clearly labeling my main connective. Here it is. The main connective is OR. Everything else is inside these two parentheses. There's no outermost parentheses, so this OR is the main connective. I bold that. I would draw a star over it if I was you on paper. I work from smallest to largest scope, right? Smallest scope is always the basic sentence letters. In our dictionary, it says A is true, C is true, B is false, C is true. Good. I fill in those values. I start inside parentheses. This negation is tiny. Look at this. It only applies to A, so I solve that next. This not A is false. If A is true, not A is false, I'll underline to make that stand out so you're no longer paying attention to the value under A. I can now solve this and by comparing, in my case, the single underline values. I'm comparing the value false to the value true in terms of and. An and is only true when both sides are true, so this is not a case with both sides true, so this and is false. Forgive that. So I would, if I could, double underline this value if I am working on paper. I will remove these underlines, right, because I can't double underline on my computer, but there I am. This and value has replaced all these other values. I now go to the right and work inside these parentheses. What do I have? I have a conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. This is not ordered true then false, so this conditional is true. That value replaces the others, so don't have to cross them out if I'm good at underlining. So I'm comparing this value on the right to this value on the left in terms of or. An or is only false when both sides are false. This does not have both sides false, so this or's value is true. That is my final value, so I circle it. That's the main connective value, replaces all the others. Now it's clear. Sentence 4, under the S exercises. We first begin by labeling our main connective. Again, sorry on computer, this doesn't bold well, so I'll underline the main connective. That is the final value I want to solve last, right? Smallest scope, I work from smallest to largest scope. Smallest scope is always the basic sentence letters. B is false, C is true. So now, right, I will follow the basic rule. I could work either side, but I'll go inside parentheses as I usually do and solve this first. Yay, we have a double arrow. A double arrow says what? It is true when both sides are the same. Are both sides of our double arrow here the same? No, they are not. So this double arrow is false. I will underline it so I realize it is more important than these values under B and C. The left side of our sentence is false. We can now move to the right side. This C is negated, so what do I have to do? Reverse its truth value. I will underline it, so I pay attention to this value and neglect this one. We are now ready to solve our conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. This is not ordered true then false, so this is not a false case. This case is true, so I circle it on paper, I'll bold it, that's the final value. Let's go to example 5 on the S exercises on page 20. We look at this. Oh no, a lot of parentheses, but we're not afraid. I look at the parentheses, open and close there, open and close there, so this is my main connective. I would put a star over it, I will simply underline it, that's the best I could do. So now, how do we work? We work for the smallest scope. That will always be our basic sentence letters first. A is true, B is false, C is true, B is false, according to our dictionary. Then I need to work inside the innermost parentheses, so I'm right here. I am comparing these two values in terms of my conditional value. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. Oops, sorry, dang it. Sorry, I meant to write a false. I wrote B. That was really stupid. Good, please forgive me. I hope you caught that. I'm comparing these two values, right? A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. So what is this value? False. I underline it because that's how I like to work. So this value replaced those two. So now I'm comparing this conditional value to this value under C. I'll underline the values I'm comparing to try to make it clear. Now I can solve, look where I am, the sentence inside this outer parentheses in terms of a new conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. This one is not ordered true then false, so this conditional is true. I would double underline that if I was working on paper. I'll remove these underlines just so it's clear where we're working. I would be looking at this double underline value, and what am I doing? Comparing it to this value. So on paper, I would double underline that as well so I can clearly see what I'm comparing. I am solving for the main connective, the conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true then false. And what do we have? We have a true then false case. So the final value under this main connective is false. I circle that if I'm working on paper. That is my final value. That is the value for the whole sentence in this condition. And finally, we're almost done. Example number 6 in the S exercises. We can do this. It's all the same steps. It's just staying organized and using underlining, crossing out, or writing in bold to stay really clear in our organization. We look at our sentence. We begin by labeling the main connective. There it is. I'm going to make it stand out in all sorts of ways. That's my final value. We can see this negation only affects this, so this and is the main connective. Now, we next work from smallest to largest scope. Smallest scope is always your sentence letter values. A is true, C is true, A is true, B is the value that's false. We now work, we'll start on the left. We start inside parentheses so we can solve this and. This negation is outside parentheses, so we have to solve this first. Remember, we can't distribute value because that would change the meaning. Here we have an and, comparing these two true values. An and is only true when both sides are true, so this and is true. Good? Now, I will simply make that highlighted in this way so it stands out. Use different methods. I like underlining. I'll use this case. This value has replaced these two values, right? So what does that mean? This is the value for all the values inside parentheses here. And what do I know? This value is negated. Good? So this and sentence is true, so this negative sentence has to reverse the value and become false. I will make that stand out by underlining it. Now we have these values. What do we have? Uh-oh, look at this. These negations apply to the basic sentence letters, so we have to reverse these values first. If A is true, not A is false. If B is false, not B is true. In this case, I will remove these values, cross them out. I would underline these on paper so that I realize I'm only concerned with the values under the negations. They have replaced the value of A, the value of B. So now what am I looking at? I'm looking at negative A, false, negative B, true, in terms of a conditional. A conditional is only false when ordered true, then false. So is this one a false case? Nope, it is not ordered true, then false. So this conditional is true. I will underline that value so it stands out. Now, I think you could see these would both be double underlined on paper. These are the only values I have left. False on the left, true on the right. And now, the only value left is my main connective, the and. An and is only true when both sides are true, so this and is false. That is my main connective. I would circle it. That is my final value for example 6. I hope you did well. Get some practice, right? Look over the video, look over your notes. This should be a skill. Once you understand the rules, it's just staying organized. Thanks.